Hello and welcome to this VMware Spring Special. Coming up in today's show, I'll be chatting to Spencer Gibb about everything that's new with Spring Cloud. I'll also be discussing new developments in the Spring Tool Suite with Martin Lippert. Later on, we also have Sebastien Deleuze chatting with me about how Spring is going native, and we'll be hearing from Grandja about the latest developments in Spring security. But first, did you know that start.spring.io generates about 1.5 million brand new Spring Boot projects every month? That's a huge number, and it's a signal of just how many people are starting their journey towards Java microservices with Spring Boot. So I caught up with Phil Webb to find out about all the latest developments. Phil Webb, welcome to Tech Summit 2021.
Hi there, nice of you to invite me. Thank you.
Hey, it's our pleasure. And for those out there who maybe haven't met you before, Phil, perhaps you could tell them a little bit about the sort of things that you work on in Springland.
Sure. So my name is Phil Webb. I've been with VMware for, I guess, about 8 years or so. I was with VMware, then span out to Pivotal, then back to VMware. And for most of that time, I've been working on Spring Boot. So I've been on the Spring Boot team since it started, and I'm the current lead of the Spring Boot project.
Well, fantastic. Now, Spring Boot, of course, is a major project, really, really important. What sort of things were you working on last year in Spring Boot?
So Spring Boot, last year we did 2 releases. I guess we did 2.3 and 2.4. And both of them were really focused on Kubernetes, I think, as the main sort of theme. So especially if you go back to earlier versions, we were very much trying to align with what Pivotal was doing with Cloud Foundry. And when Tanzu started, we really had quite a bit of catching up to do to make sure that Spring Boot apps worked smoothly on a sort of bare metal Kubernetes. We've done like graceful shutdown so that your apps can start and stop properly. We've done added probe support. We've done build pack support, which has been pretty popular. We've integrated the existing kind of build pack projects to allow you to kind of build a Docker image straight from Maven or Gradle, which is a nice onboarding experience. More recently, we've added a lot of support for properties so that you could import things like what we've called config trees, but are basically volume mounted secrets in Kubernetes.
So how about 2021? What sort of things are coming up for Spring Boot in 21?
One of the things I think we're interested in looking at is how you bind Kubernetes services with Spring Boot. So like how you get from a definition of a database that's somehow spun up to connecting that to your app. So that might be one thing that we're going to focus on. There's going to be lots of these like kind of little things in the 2x line that are going to keep going. And then in parallel, we're going to start thinking about the Spring Boot 3x line, which is going to be based on Spring Framework 6. And there's kind of at the very early stages at the moment, but we suspect that that's going to be a lot of work around Graal, native images and performance, and also probably moving to Jakarta EE9 APIs as well, which will be a kind of large chunk of work that we need to just get done in order to stay on a supported version of Java EE.
And a lot of VMware clients will be very dependent on Spring. So I guess you have to think carefully about how you can take them along on that journey.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's a real hard problem. I think we've just about got the balance right so far, but it's always tricky to be able to refine and change things and make them better without forcing people to kind of throw their hands up and have so much change that they decide to evaluate other technologies. So I think one of Spring's biggest strength is its back compatibility. So it's Spring Boot is more on the cutting edge of breaking things when it wants to, but we definitely have that in mind that we don't want to force users to kind of rewrite their entire app.
No, absolutely. And of course, you also write great guides, don't you, so that folks can make those small changes that are necessary to move between versions. And I know the documentation is very important, isn't it? And you folks produce a lot of it.
Yeah, we took a slightly different approach to some of the other Spring projects when we did Boot, in that we try and keep the documentation that's out there kind of relevant to the current version, and then we use the release notes to guide people to how they upgrade. So some of the other projects put the sort of changes in the documentation, and we don't do that in Spring Boot. We try and keep the sort of reference guide current, but the upgrade instructions on the side.
All right. Well, Phil, it's always a pleasure to speak to you and to hear about what's going on in Spring Boot Land. I hope that 2021 brings all those wonderful changes and Spring Boot 3. I can't wait.
Hope so too. Thanks a lot.
Just one of the reasons that Spring developers are so productive are the excellent tools provided by the Spring team. So let's catch up with Martin Lippert to find out what's new. Martin, welcome to Tech Summit. How are you today?
Hey, thanks. I'm good. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, it's our pleasure. And of course, for those who perhaps don't know you or are new to VMware, you work on the Spring Tool Suite.
Yeah, exactly. That's what my team and myself we are working on. It's basically our goal is to make you as a Spring developer more productive, and that's why we work on the tools and try to make it easier to deal with all the Spring goodness in the ecosystem inside of your existing IDE. And we try to enhance those existing IDEs with additional Spring goodness so that it makes it easier to get started with Spring projects, work with the Spring Boot apps and things like that.
And what sort of features and advances did we see in that suite in 2020, last year?
When I look at last year, I immediately think about, I think, two big things that we changed and that we improved. And the one was, if you have an existing Spring Boot project, usually if you start a new Spring Boot project, you go to start.spring.io, right? And you create a new project, and that's super easy, and that's super convenient. And we have a wizard in the IDE that basically does the same. Super easy to get started. But what happens if you decide later on that you would like to add a dependency? So we implemented something that makes it super easy for you to do that using the start.spring.io infrastructure and giving you plenty of room to enhance your existing project and just select the additional dependencies and you get them on your project. So it tells you exactly, hey, if you add this dependency, it would also do all these other things to your project. Do you want them? Gives you a little bit of a diff dialog. And then you can select, yeah, give me all those changes. And you get all those changes and updated stuff on your project, which is, I think, very nice. And the other thing that we worked on, which is, I think, super exciting, is that we looked at the Spring Boot support in Spring Boot. I think it was 2.4 where it got introduced, or 2.3, to create Docker images or OCI container images. And we thought about, wouldn't it be nice to integrate that directly in the IDE and turn that into, let's say, a one-click experience? And we did that. We did that by integrating that into the dashboard that exists in the IDE that we added for Spring projects. So the dashboard usually it shows you all the projects that you have in your workspace, all the Spring projects, makes it easy to go to the console, start them up, look inside of those projects when they are running. And we enhanced it with an additional option to integrate Docker. So if you have a local Docker daemon running, you can just add that to the dashboard, and then you can drag and drop your project, your Spring project onto that, and it will automatically call out the build and creates the Docker image for that, the container image, using the Spring Boot support. And, which I think is pretty nice, it will also automatically start that on Docker and configure that so that it feels like it is running exactly like a local project, but inside of the Docker container. So what that means is you can use your existing debugger, for example, in the IDE. So you can drag and drop the app, it deploys stuff in the Docker, but it automatically connects your debugger of your IDE to that process. So it feels like, hey, it's running on my machine. I can debug it in the same way than any other local Spring Boot app, which I think is pretty cool and useful for developers to see what's going on at runtime.
That is really cool, yeah. So if folks want to try this stuff for themselves, where can they find it? If they haven't tried it before, where would they go?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on which IDE you prefer. If you think, hey, I use the ready-to-download Eclipse-based IDE distribution, then just go to spring.io/tools.
Martin, thank you so much. It was really insightful. Lots of information there, lots of things for people to try.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Without doubt, the most exciting change to come to Java for a number of years is GraalVM. So let's find out from Sebastien how Spring is integrating that exciting new technology. Sebastien, hey, welcome to Tech Summit. Really nice to see you. How are you today?
Hey Ben, I'm super fine. I'm super happy to be here. Thanks.
I wanted to talk to you about the things that you're working on in the Spring world. But before we do that, maybe you could give us an idea of the sort of stuff that you've been working on towards the end of last year, and then maybe we'll have a chat about the stuff that's coming on in the future.
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a Spring Framework committer, and my main topic is currently working on GraalVM support, especially for native image. So basically, the goal is to compile your Spring Boot application into a native executable using what we call GraalVM native image compiler, which has been created by Oracle. Last year, the status was basically alpha status. So the goal was basically to try and find the right way to support this kind of native runtime. Towards the end of the year, we have been clarifying where we want to go, basically defining a roadmap for this year in order to go toward beta and production support later.
For those who perhaps haven't heard of GraalVM before, could you give us just a 30-second sort of idea of why folks should be excited about it?
Yeah, sure. So basically, there are quite a lot of differences between GVM and native runtime. GVM, as you know, is super dynamic. You can do a lot of things, but also it requires quite a lot of infrastructure to get all this dynamic stuff. So basically, native is a more radical approach. You freeze a lot of things at build time, and then your application basically starts instantly. And the second advantage is lower memory consumption. So I think for big application, you don't really care that much, but for microservices, small applications, serverless, the difference is quite significant, and we can achieve 4 times memory reduction, which is pretty significant. So in terms of cloud economics, that matters a lot.
So less memory, faster startup, and you have lower CPU as well, do you?
It depends. I think it does not really change the CPU consumption via the workload that you receive, but there is less CPU involved as startup, basically.
Yeah.
I think the GVM can go faster because, you know, there is all this dynamic optimization that is done based on your workload. But even if the peak performance of native can be a little bit lower, it's available from startup. You no need to warm up your GVM, so it's more predictive in terms of performance.
What does that mean for 2021 then?
This native support is quite a big challenge because it changes a lot of things. I would say the first goal is reaching better compatibility. The second goal is to have an optimized footprint in order to have a big difference between GVM and native. And we want to do that as part of our upcoming beta release. So Spring Native 0.9. That should come in February or March. And during 2021, basically, we will release 0.9.0, 0.9.1.2.3, and we will gradually increase the compatibility, lower the footprint, and we will basically add more build-time transformation to really turn your Spring application into something that could be compiled with a very few tricks by the native image compiler, and that's really our goal.
Cool. So folks, by the sort of end of next year, hopefully there'll be, like you said, more coverage across more Spring projects, but your cloud economics can really improve with this technology, right?
Yeah, that's totally true, and that's why we take this topic very seriously.
And Sebastien, I know that you're not working alone, are you? Do you want to tell us a little bit about the team?
Yeah, sure. I'm working hard with Andy Clement, Brian Clausel, Dave Sayer, a lot of people in the Spring team who are working on that. So really, that's a team effort. So we really transform gradually the experimental and incubating project into a module that could be integrated in Spring Framework, in Spring Boot, and in the various Spring projects. There won't be the Spring Native 1.0. Instead, what we expect is directly to merge, to integrate what we develop currently in Spring Native into Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6, the next generation that we are about to start working on, and that's really the end goal.
Sebastien, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ben. That was a pleasure. Bye.
In last year's Spring survey, 85% of people said they were either using Spring Cloud or they were thinking about it. So I caught up with Spencer Gibb to find out about all the latest developments. Spencer, welcome to Tech Summit 2021.
Thank you for having me, Ben. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
What sort of things were happening in Spring Cloud in 2020 that folks at home should really know about?
Well, so last year for Spring Cloud, we kind of kicked off a major versioning scheme change across the Spring portfolio. We went to a calendar versioning type scheme. So our previous release train was Hoxton, and this year's was 2020.0, codename Ilford. We wanted to be able to make some breaking changes. A large portion of the Netflix projects had been in maintenance mode, and so they're no longer maintained, and we're dropping support for many of those, and so that happened in Ilford. So what's left is Eureka Server and Eureka Client, so things like Ribbon and Hystrix are no longer, and Zool are no longer there. But we've been working hard for the past few years on replacements for those. So some of the things to look for are full support for Spring Cloud Load Balancer. We have a new abstraction called Spring Cloud Circuit Breaker that has different implementations. By default, we, along with the Netflix engineering team, recommend Resilience for J as a replacement for Hystrix for circuit breakers. But we also support others, Spring Retry, for example, and the circuit breaker implementation from Alibaba. And then, of course, Spring Cloud Gateway is the Zool replacement that's been in the works for a long time.
And I recall taking a look at Spring Gateway a while ago now, probably a good sort of year or so ago, but that project is going really well, isn't it?
It is. We have a lot of folks that are using it. There's a commercial product that exists, and work now is being done to have that commercial work supported on Kubernetes, and continues to get better as the downstream libraries do Netty, Reactor Netty, and Spring Framework itself, since Gateway is built on WebFlux. It continues to evolve. It continues to have great support from the community and from commercial folks as well.
And what about the coming year? What highlights and what innovations are you looking forward to working on with the team in 2021?
That's a great question. We're actually getting ready to have our planning meeting shortly. So most of what I say is some speculation on my part as we decide as a team what we're going to do, which is one of the great things about the Spring team. There are a number of things that we've been thinking of for some time or looking at. Things like potentially TCP support in Spring Cloud Gateway. We've been looking at Spring Cloud Kubernetes as potentially a nice way for Java developers coming into the ecosystem to write Kubernetes controllers in Java. So those are some of the things that we're looking at potentially this year.
And Spencer, what about my personal favorite, RSocket? What sort of things can we look forward to seeing there this year?
So I will continue work with other folks on the Spring team on the RSocket routing broker. This is a project that allows you to have service discovery and resilience and things for RSocket, but in one central small little cluster of brokers. And we'll continue to see that used more in our commercial products and open source products as well.
Spencer, thank you so much for taking us through that today. Enjoy the rest of the year. Maybe we'll see you again same time next year.
I look forward to it.
One of the most popular Spring components is Spring Security. It's right up there with Spring Data and with Webb MVC. So let's find out what's going on in Spring Security with Joe Grandja. Joe Grandja, welcome to Tech Summit 2021. How are you?
Can't complain given these times, but hey, it's all good.
So Joe, maybe you could give folks at home a little introduction about yourself. Tell them the sort of things that you work on with Spring.
Yeah, for sure. Well, honestly, I'm like all OAuth to OpenID Connect hardcore, to put it bluntly, right? That's pretty much what I've been doing, I guess about 5 years on the Spring Security team.
Right, so you're Mr. Security. So if we're not on the list, we're not coming in, right?
Exactly.
What was 2020 like for you? What sort of stuff did you work on for Spring in 2020?
We started Spring Authorization Server. It's an experimental project right now. We started this back in April. Come a long way, and I'll share with you a link on the current features that have been completed, as well as a roadmap of upcoming features. But it's been Spring Authorization Server in 2020, and it will be going forward too.
So what will 2021 bring for you? What sort of stuff are you working on now? And what can folks expect to see?
Well, 2020 was really the core features that are really required for an MVP authorization server candidate, right? But going forward in 2020, we're going to keep building on that, but we're also going to really start expanding on OpenID Connect support. OpenID Connect. So OAuth 2 is all about authorization. It has nothing to do with authentication, right? That's where OpenID Connect comes in. OpenID Connect builds on top of OAuth 2 and provides that authentication piece. So then now you have authorization, authentication, right? So 2020 this year, we're gonna continue building on the maze of specifications of OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. There's just so many, right? But we definitely are, we've come a long way, and we're really hoping, our goal is to come up with a candidate MVP release by mid-year, providing those, protocol implementations of OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect that enable some company or some organization to build a product on top of it.
So would a developer, for example, be able to use it as a fake or as a mock server, maybe if they're offline testing, or how would developers use this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest reasons we started this, obviously we got client and resource server support, but you need an authorization server, right? To be able to test your client application, test your resource server application. A lot of developers don't want to use, existing products because first of all, maybe they're just a lot more difficult to configure, or you got to pay for it. They want to be able to stand up an authorization server super quick. right, to be able to test their client application resource server. So this is really one of the main use cases, is for a developer building a OAuth client application or a resource server to stand up an authorization server with ease and quickly to be able to test it out. So that's definitely one of the primary use cases of this initiative.
Joe, as ever, it's always a great pleasure to talk to you, and this particular occasion was no different. Thank you so much for giving us your time this afternoon to talk about Authorization Server.
Right on. Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks again for inviting me.
Sadly, that's all we have time for. I'll leave you with these 3 key points. Number 1, Spring is going native. Number 2, Spring Boot is huge. And number 3, Spring Cloud is essential. Enjoy the rest of Tech Summit, and until next time, goodbye.